Clara was not like most women married to billionaires. Her husband, Daniel, was one of the richest men in the country, the proud owner of a luxury airline known for its top-class service and elegant flights. People admired his success, respected his power, and envied his wealth. Many expected his wife to live the same way, to wear expensive jewelry, to travel with bodyguards, and to show off her status wherever she went. But Clara was different. She loved a simple life. Even after years of being married to Daniel, she still preferred to cook her own meals, shop in small stores, and wear clothes that looked ordinary but were comfortable to her. She believed in blending with people, not standing above them. Daniel often teased her about her simplicity. "Clara," he would say with a smile, "you could walk into a luxury hotel, and they would think you're just another guest, not the wife of the man who owns it." Clara always laughed at his words and replied, "That's exactly how I want it. I don't need the world to know who I am. I only need you to know." Their love was strong because of this honesty. Daniel admired her heart, her calm nature, and her ability to remain grounded in a world full of show-offs. One morning, Daniel had to fly abroad for an urgent business deal. He took a private jet with his team, leaving Clara behind at home. After he left, Clara thought about surprising him by joining him at the destination city. She didn't tell him. Instead, she went to her laptop and booked a ticket, not on a private jet, not even under her special VIP identity, but just as an ordinary passenger on one of his airline's regular flights. She did this because she wanted to feel what the experience was like for normal people. She wanted to see the service, the comfort, and the real truth of how passengers were treated. She believed it was the best way to surprise her husband and also understand what people experienced on his airline. Clara chose a morning flight. She packed lightly, carrying only a small handbag with a few clothes, her book, and a notebook. She wore her favorite long skirt, a plain blouse, and a simple cardigan. On her feet, she had comfortable shoes, not designer heels. Around her neck was a small chain with a tiny pendant, her mother's gift, not some expensive diamond. To anyone looking, she was just an ordinary middle-aged woman traveling alone. When the taxi dropped her at the airport, she stepped out calmly. Other passengers hurried with big luggage, some dressed in flashy clothes, some busy on their phones talking about business deals. Clara quietly pulled her small bag and walked toward the check-in counter. She smiled at the staff, greeted them politely, and handed over her ticket. The young man at the counter looked at her for a moment, scanned her documents, and without much warmth, handed her the boarding pass. Clara didn't mind. She had met hundreds of people like him in her life. She knew not everyone looked beyond appearances. At the security check, she patiently stood in line. A woman in front of her complained loudly about the queue, saying she was too important to wait. Clara stayed quiet, holding her handbag close. She believed patience showed more class than arrogance ever could. After a few minutes, she finally cleared security and made her way to the gate. She sat in a corner seat near the window, opening her book while waiting for the boarding announcement. Nobody noticed her, and honestly, that was how she preferred it. When boarding started, Clara calmly joined the line. Some passengers pushed forward, eager to get in first. She stayed in her place, not rushing, not arguing. When her turn came, she gave her boarding pass and stepped onto the plane. Inside, she was greeted with half-hearted smiles from the crew. They welcomed other passengers warmly, especially those wearing luxury brands, but with Clara, their expressions quickly faded. She noticed it, but she did not say anything. She just walked to her seat in the business class section, sat down quietly, and placed her bag under the seat. The cabin was elegant, just as she expected. Wide seats, clean blankets, and sparkling glasses on the tray tables. She felt proud of her husband for building such a successful company. But soon, she began to notice little things. The crew rushed to assist a man in a suit, carrying his heavy laptop bag, yet when Clara asked one of them if she could get a little help with her seat belt adjustment, the attendant gave her a quick nod but never came back. Clara adjusted it herself, still smiling. She believed in not letting small things disturb her peace. A few minutes later, another passenger in an expensive jacket walked in late. The crew hurried to take his bag, offer him a drink, and even joked with him about his busy businessman lifestyle. Clara quietly watched. When she raised her hand politely to request a glass of water, the same attendant ignored her for several minutes, busy talking to other passengers. She lowered her hand, not wanting to disturb anyone, but inside her heart, she felt a small sting. This was her husband's airline. Was this how they treated those they thought were unimportant? As the boarding completed, the captain's voice came on the speaker, welcoming everyone on board. Clara sat back in her seat, looking out of the window. She thought about Daniel. He always told her that real respect was shown in small actions, not in grand speeches. And here she was, about to see with her own eyes how people behaved when they didn't know who she truly was. The plane began to taxi on the runway, and Clara felt the familiar excitement of flying. She had traveled many times with Daniel on private jets, but she always enjoyed the simple magic of being in the air, watching the clouds, and feeling the world shrink below her. To her, flying was not about luxury, it was about freedom. But she couldn't ignore the way the crew kept overlooking her, as if she didn't exist. She reminded herself to stay calm. She wasn't there to demand special treatment. She was there to see the truth. During takeoff, Clara held her seat armrests, closing her eyes with a smile. The engines roared, the plane lifted, and soon they were above the clouds. Passengers around her settled in, some opening laptops, some chatting, some ordering drinks. Clara sat quietly, her book open on her lap, but her eyes wandered, watching how the attendants behaved. She noticed how quickly they rushed to serve wine to the well-dressed passengers, while others like her had to wait or were ignored. It wasn't about the service itself, it was about the attitude. She could feel it. And deep inside, she knew this flight was going to reveal something important. She looked out at the clouds, her heart calm but her mind alert. Clara had no idea that the small choices of the crew, the way they treated her, and their failure to see beyond appearances would soon bring a storm into their lives. For now, she only sat quietly, a simple woman on a journey, carrying with her a truth that no one on that plane could ever imagine. The flight was now in the air, and Clara sat quietly in her seat, trying to focus on the book she had carried with her. But her eyes often drifted toward the aisle, watching the crew move back and forth. They carried trays, adjusted blankets, and leaned down to talk to passengers who looked wealthy. Their smiles widened for those in suits and dresses, and their voices carried more warmth when they served them. But whenever they came to her row, their faces seemed to lose interest, as if she did not deserve the same level of care. Clara noticed it, and though her heart felt heavy, she kept her calm expression, reminding herself not to react too quickly. After some time, she gently pressed the service button above her seat. She waited patiently as the small light above her head glowed, signaling that she needed assistance. Minutes passed, but no one came. She saw an attendant walk by, glance at the light, and continue down the aisle without stopping. Clara lowered her hand slowly, realizing that her request was being ignored. She sighed softly and looked out the window, trying to distract herself with the view of the endless sky. A while later, the attendants began offering drinks. They pushed a trolley filled with glasses, juices, and bottles of wine. Clara smiled, thinking she might finally get her water. When the trolley reached her row, she asked politely, "Could I have a glass of water, please?" The attendant, a young woman with sharp eyes, barely looked at her. Instead, she turned her head toward the man sitting in the seat across the aisle. "Would you like white wine or red, sir?" she asked him with a cheerful smile, ignoring Clara completely. Clara stayed silent. She did not want to embarrass anyone. She waited for the attendant to return after serving the others, but once again, she moved the trolley past her without stopping. Another attendant followed behind, laughing at a joke made by a passenger in a gold watch. Clara raised her voice slightly, "Excuse me, may I have some water?" This time, the attendant paused, gave her a quick look, and said, "Yes, yes, I'll bring it later." Then he walked away, leaving Clara to sit with her dry throat, her request forgotten. Clara leaned back in her seat, holding her book but unable to read a single word. She felt invisible. Around her, passengers in stylish clothes enjoyed glasses of champagne, clinked them together, and chatted loudly. She was the only one left without even a glass of water. A thought passed through her mind: how many ordinary passengers must have experienced the same treatment when they didn't look important enough? It troubled her deeply, because she knew this was not what Daniel wanted for his airline. He always said that every passenger, whether rich or poor, deserved to feel comfortable and respected. Meal service began an hour later. The delicious smell of warm food filled the cabin. Attendants rolled out trays covered with elegant dishes. Clara straightened in her seat, hoping things would be different this time. The crew carefully presented meals to certain passengers, addressing them by their last names, offering choices with politeness. But when Clara's turn came, one attendant placed a tray in front of her without a word. She looked down at it. It was not the full meal she saw given to others. It looked like the last plate they had left, thrown together without care. The rice was cold on one side, and the dessert was missing. Clara forced a gentle smile and whispered, "Thank you," though her heart ached. As she picked up her fork, she overheard two attendants whispering near the galley. One of them laughed softly, saying, "She must have booked a last-minute ticket. Look at her clothes, she doesn't belong here in business class." The other chuckled in agreement, glancing toward Clara's seat. Their words reached her ears clearly, and she lowered her fork slowly, staring at her half-filled tray. She was not angry. Anger was not in her nature, but she was disappointed. She remembered her husband's voice, "People will reveal their true character when they think no one important is watching." And right now, she was witnessing that truth. The hours of the flight passed slowly. Clara tried to stay comfortable, but the attitude of the crew weighed on her. When other passengers asked for blankets, the attendants rushed to bring them fresh ones. When Clara quietly asked if she could get a blanket too, she was handed an old one that looked wrinkled, as if it had already been used. She held it carefully, pulling it around her shoulders without complaint. Even in this treatment, she tried to keep her dignity. Beside her, a man in his 30s noticed the difference. He leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "I saw how they gave you that meal, and the way they're treating you. It isn't right." Clara gave him a soft smile and said, "Thank you for noticing. Don't worry. I'll be fine." She did not reveal her identity. She believed the time for that would come later, and it would speak louder if she stayed silent now. Meanwhile, the attendants continued to focus their attention on the passengers they thought were wealthy. They offered them extra drinks, helped them adjust their seats, and even laughed at their small jokes. But when Clara asked once more for water after her meal, the attendant frowned as if it were a burden, then finally brought her a half-filled glass with no ice. She accepted it with grace, sipping it slowly, even though she knew she deserved better. As the flight went on, Clara's mind drifted to her husband. She imagined him in the boardroom, passionately speaking about the values of his company. She knew how much effort Daniel had put into building his airline's reputation. He often said, "It's not just planes and tickets, Clara. It's about people. How we make them feel from the moment they step in until the moment they leave." Clara sighed quietly. If only Daniel could see what she was experiencing now, he would be heartbroken. The passengers around her grew comfortable, watching movies, eating snacks, or dozing off. Clara looked out at the sky again, her heart calm but her thoughts heavy. She thought about the gap between appearances and reality. On the outside, this airline looked perfect: luxury seats, beautiful cabins, polished service. But inside, when the mask of politeness slipped, there was discrimination, judgment, and coldness toward those who seemed ordinary. Clara closed her eyes for a while, resting against her seat. She whispered a silent prayer in her heart, not for herself, but for the crew. She hoped they would one day learn that kindness was more powerful than pride, and respect was more valuable than money. She hoped they would see that a person's worth could not be measured by clothes or jewelry. But as the hours passed, the coldness continued. Each time an attendant walked by, they acted as if she were invisible. Clara kept her grace, her patience, and her quiet dignity. She did not let anger take over her heart. She simply endured, observing carefully. She knew that this journey was not just a flight, it was a mirror, showing her the truth about the people hired to represent her husband's dream. What she didn't know was that this flight, and the way the crew was treating her, would soon become one of the most unforgettable lessons of their lives. The truth was only waiting to be revealed, and when it came, it would shake the crew to their very core. The flight moved on, and the hours stretched slowly. Clara tried to distract herself with her book, but the words blurred on the page. Her mind was too heavy with the way the crew had treated her since the beginning. She could not understand how people could so easily judge others by appearance. She had asked for so little: a smile, a glass of water, some kindness. Yet, instead of warmth, she had been met with cold eyes, careless hands, and words filled with judgment. Meal trays were being collected, and the attendants moved through the aisle with practiced speed. Clara noticed again how their tone changed depending on the passenger. To one man in a shiny watch, the attendant said with a bright laugh, "Did you enjoy the meal, sir? Anything else I can get for you?" To Clara, the same attendant muttered quickly, "Finished," before snatching away her tray without even looking her in the eye. Clara did not reply. She simply folded her hands in her lap, calm but thoughtful. The man sitting across from her, who had earlier whispered his concern, kept glancing in her direction. He was clearly troubled by what he saw. Finally, he leaned toward her and said in a quiet voice, "I don't understand why they are treating you this way. You are polite, you haven't asked for much, yet they act as if you are invisible." Clara gave him a small, peaceful smile. "It's all right. Sometimes life gives us chances to see people's true nature. Maybe that's what I am supposed to witness today." Her words were soft but carried a quiet strength. The man nodded slowly, realizing that she was not an ordinary traveler. Something about her calmness, her grace even in mistreatment, felt different. Meanwhile, in the galley, two attendants chatted softly, unaware that their voices carried down the aisle. "Did you see her clothes?" one whispered with a smirk. "She looks like she should be in economy, not here. Probably saved for months to buy this seat." The other chuckled and replied, "Yes, and she keeps asking for water. You'd think she had never been on a plane before." Their laughter was low, but Clara could hear it. Her heart sank, not because she felt insulted, but because she knew how deeply wrong it was. Clara remembered the countless times Daniel had spoken about his airline's values. He believed respect was the foundation of service. "We don't sell seats," he would say during meetings. "We sell experiences, we sell comfort, we sell dignity. Every passenger is important." Clara sighed gently. If only he could see this moment. Later in the flight, entertainment screens glowed as passengers watched movies or shows. Clara scrolled through the options but was too distracted to focus. Instead, she observed quietly. The attendants walked past her seat several times but never stopped to ask if she was comfortable. They leaned down to adjust pillows for others, poured extra drinks for the ones they thought important, and offered smiles that never reached their eyes when they glanced at her. Her patience was tested again when refreshments were served. A tray of small snacks was offered row by row. When it reached Clara, the attendant placed the tray in front of her with little care, spilling crumbs on her lap. "Oh," Clara murmured softly, brushing the crumbs away. The attendant didn't even apologize. Instead, she turned quickly to the passenger behind Clara, speaking with sudden politeness as if nothing had happened. Clara kept her calm, though inside she wondered how many passengers had been treated this way before, unseen and unheard. The man across the aisle could not stay silent any longer. "Excuse me," he said firmly to the attendant. "She asked for water earlier, and she hasn't been given proper service since the beginning. Why are you ignoring her?" The attendant blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting anyone to defend Clara. She forced a quick smile. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. We're just busy. I'll get her water now." Then she hurried off, her steps a little faster, as if she realized she had been caught. Clara looked at the man with gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded. "It's not right. People should be treated equally, no matter how they look." Clara's heart warmed at his words. At least one stranger understood what fairness meant. When the attendant finally returned with the water, Clara accepted it politely. But she knew it wasn't kindness, it was only guilt. Still, she sipped the water slowly, savoring it as if it were a reminder that dignity is not lost when others fail to show respect. Dignity, she knew, comes from within. As the flight dragged on, the cabin lights dimmed. Many passengers closed their eyes, resting before landing. Clara, however, stayed awake, her thoughts deep. She thought about Daniel, about his dream of building an airline that people trusted and loved. She thought about the thousands of employees who worked hard to keep that dream alive. But she also thought about the few, like these attendants, who could destroy that trust with careless actions. One rude gesture, one dismissive word, one ignored request that was enough to leave a passenger hurt forever. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, breathing slowly. She did not allow anger to touch her heart. Instead, she reminded herself that this was a lesson. She was meant to see this, so she could carry the truth back to Daniel. She would not shout, she would not complain on the plane, but she would remember every detail. And when the time was right, the truth would be revealed. As the hours passed, the whispers of the attendants, the careless service, and the cold looks continued. But Clara remained steady. Her silence became stronger than their words. The more they ignored her, the more she grew certain that this journey had a purpose. In the final stretch of the flight, when the cabin lights brightened again, Clara looked around. She noticed the passengers dressed in wealth looked satisfied, smiling, and chatting about their smooth journey. She wondered if they had noticed the difference in service given to others. Some probably had, but chose to stay quiet. Others perhaps did not care. But Clara knew. And she knew her husband would care too. The attendants passed once more, checking seat belts and preparing for landing. They offered polite smiles to the wealthiest passengers, but to Clara, they simply nodded quickly and moved on. It no longer surprised her. She simply folded her hands and looked out the window, watching the land slowly appear beneath the clouds. Her heart was calm, but her mind was clear. The truth was in front of her, and soon, the crew who thought she was just a simple woman would discover who she really was. For now, she chose silence. For now, she chose patience. But she knew the moment of truth was close. And when it came, the crew would understand that their small acts of disrespect had not been so small after all. They would realize that the simple woman they had ignored was not powerless. She was the very person whose opinion mattered the most. The plane began its slow descent, the captain's voice filling the cabin as he announced the landing. Passengers adjusted their seats, fastened their belts, and prepared for arrival. Clara sat quietly by the window, watching the ground grow closer. Her heart was calm, though she knew that the moment of truth was approaching. The attendants, still unaware of who she really was, moved quickly down the aisle, checking on passengers, straightening blankets, and offering their final polite words. To those dressed in expensive clothes, their smiles were warm and lingering. To Clara, there was only a brief nod before they moved on. As the wheels touched down and the plane rolled along the runway, the passengers clapped softly, a few expressing their relief at the smooth landing. Clara folded her hands in her lap, her face serene. She knew that beyond the glass doors of the airport, her husband was waiting. Daniel had flown earlier in his private jet, and his assistant had already told Clara he would be meeting her at the terminal. She wondered how the crew would react when they saw the man who greeted her was not just her husband, but the owner of the very airline they worked for. The plane parked, and the doors opened. Passengers began to gather their belongings, pulling down bags and rushing toward the exit. Clara remained seated, waiting for the line to thin out. She believed in patience. Besides, she knew her moment would come soon enough. The man who had defended her earlier leaned over and whispered, "Safe journey ahead, ma'am. I hope the rest of your trip is kinder than this flight." Clara gave him a warm smile. "Thank you for your kindness. You'll never know how much it means." He nodded politely, unaware that he had just shown more respect than the entire crew combined. Finally, Clara rose and stepped into the aisle. She carried her small bag herself, not expecting help. As she walked toward the exit, one of the attendants forced a stiff smile and said, "Goodbye, ma'am. Thank you for flying with us." Clara gave a gentle nod and replied softly, "Goodbye." Her voice was calm, but her eyes carried a quiet strength that unsettled the attendant without her understanding why. Clara walked out of the plane and into the terminal. The crew followed shortly behind, still chatting among themselves, their laughter low but audible. But the laughter died almost instantly when they saw what awaited Clara at the gate. Daniel stood there, tall and confident, surrounded by his assistant and two senior airline managers. He wore his usual elegant suit, but his expression lit up with pure joy when he spotted Clara. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and wrapped her in his arms. "Clara," he exclaimed warmly, his voice echoing in the hall. "You made it! I can't believe you surprised me like this." He kissed her forehead tenderly, his affection clear for everyone to see. The crew froze in their tracks. Their eyes widened as they realized what was happening. The simple woman they had ignored, mocked, and dismissed was none other than the wife of their billionaire boss. The attendants exchanged nervous glances, their faces pale. Their earlier words and careless actions rushed back into their minds like a storm, each moment sharper than the last. Daniel held Clara's hand and asked, "How was the flight? Were you comfortable? Did the staff take care of you?" His voice was full of genuine concern. Clara looked into his eyes, then glanced at the managers and crew standing nearby. Her voice was steady, calm, but every word carried weight. "I wish I could say the service matched your vision for this airline," she began softly. "But the truth is, I was ignored, spoken to without respect, and treated as if I did not belong. While others received warm smiles and care, I was left invisible. Even for a simple request like water, I was made to wait as if I didn't matter. It was clear to me that their service was not about respect, but about appearances." The managers immediately straightened, their pens and notebooks out, ready to write down every word. The crew who had served her stood in silence, their faces pale with fear. Daniel's expression hardened. He was not an angry man, but when it came to his values and his company, he never compromised. He turned slowly toward the staff, his voice calm but firm. "Is this true?" he asked, his gaze sharp. None of the attendants spoke. Their silence was the answer. Clara did not need to add anything more. Her quiet dignity and her detailed words had already painted the truth clearly. Daniel looked back at Clara, his hand gently tightening around hers. "Thank you for showing me this. You've given me the truth I needed to hear." Then he faced his managers. "This is not the service we stand for. This is not why I built this airline. I want this addressed immediately. I don't care about appearances, I care about values. Every passenger must feel respected, no matter who they are." The attendants tried to stammer weak apologies, their voices trembling, but it was too late. Their actions had already spoken louder than any excuse could. Clara did not look at them with anger. Instead, she simply glanced their way with calm eyes, as if to say, "This was your chance, and you failed it." Her grace in that moment made the truth even heavier for them to bear. As Daniel led Clara out of the terminal, whispers spread quickly among the staff and passengers who had witnessed the scene. The story would travel fast through the company, and by the next day, everyone would know that the billionaire's wife had flown undercover and seen the service for herself. And the crew who had treated her poorly would face the consequences of their choices. Clara walked beside her husband, her hand resting gently in his. She had not raised her voice, she had not created a scene, yet her presence alone had changed everything. Daniel looked at her with admiration. "You always find a way to show me the truth, Clara," he said softly. She smiled. "I only did what was right." Sometimes the smallest actions reveal the biggest truths. The attendants, standing frozen at the gate, could only watch as their employer and his wife walked away. Their hearts were heavy with regret. They now understood that every passenger carried a story, and sometimes, the simplest-looking person could be the one who mattered the most. The following morning, the atmosphere at the airline's headquarters was tense. Word had already spread across departments that something serious had happened the day before. Employees whispered in the hallways, trying to piece together the story. Some had heard that the owner's wife had flown as an ordinary passenger. Others claimed she had been mistreated by the crew. No one knew the full details, but everyone sensed that a storm was about to break. In the large conference room, Daniel sat at the head of the long polished table. Beside him was Clara, calm and composed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Across from them sat senior managers, department heads, and the very crew members who had worked on the flight the day before. Their faces were pale, their eyes downcast, each one silently dreading the words to come. Daniel's voice was steady but firm as he began. "This airline was built on values," he said, his gaze moving across the room. "Respect, dignity, and equality. These are not just words we place on walls. They are promises to every single passenger who chooses us. Yesterday, those promises were broken. And they were broken in front of the one person whose opinion I value most, my wife." The room fell silent. The attendants shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them tried to open her mouth, but Daniel raised his hand sharply. "Do not interrupt. This is not the time for excuses. This is the time for truth." Clara took a breath, her calm voice filling the room. She explained everything in detail: the dismissive looks, the ignored requests, the careless words whispered when they thought she could not hear. She did not exaggerate, she did not accuse with anger, but her steady words carried more weight than any shouting could have. Every manager scribbled notes quickly, their expressions growing darker with each detail. The attendants sat frozen, their earlier arrogance replaced by shame. Daniel listened carefully, his jaw tightening as Clara spoke. When she finished, he leaned forward. "This is not just about one passenger," he said. "This is about what happens when we forget our purpose. You thought she was unimportant, so you treated her poorly. What does that say about how you treat others who cannot speak for themselves? What does that say about the trust people place in us when they buy a ticket?" No one answered. The silence was louder than words. Daniel turned to the senior managers. "Effective immediately, the crew responsible will face disciplinary action. Some of you may no longer have a place in this company. Those who remain will undergo strict retraining. I will not allow this behavior to stain the name we have built." His tone was final, leaving no room for argument. The attendants lowered their heads, their regret written on their faces. They now understood the price of their choices. They had treated a passenger as though she was invisible, never realizing she was the one person whose opinion could change their lives forever. Clara, however, looked at them with a calm gaze. There was no anger in her eyes, only quiet disappointment. "You must remember, she said softly, every passenger carries a story. You cannot measure a person's worth by their clothes, their jewelry, or the way they look. The person you ignored could be someone's mother, someone's teacher, or someone who worked hard to save for this one trip. You must serve with respect, not judgment. That is what true service means. Her words were gentle, but they struck deeper than any punishment. The attendants felt their throats tighten. For the first time, they realized the true weight of their mistake. After the meeting, Daniel ordered the managers to create new training programs. These programs would focus not only on technical service but also on empathy, respect, and kindness. I don't want robots serving drinks, Daniel said firmly. I want human beings who can see other human beings. Within days, the story spread across the entire airline. Employees whispered about how the owner's wife had flown undercover and experienced the service firsthand. Some felt embarrassed, others inspired. The lesson became clear to all: every passenger mattered. No one could afford to forget that again. For Clara, the experience was not about punishment but about change. She had never wanted anyone to lose their job, but she believed consequences were necessary for true growth. That evening, as she sat with Daniel in their quiet home, she reflected on what had happened. Daniel looked at her, admiration in his eyes. Clara, you've done more for this airline in one flight than I could have done in months of meetings. You reminded everyone why we started this in the first place. Clara smiled gently. I only did what was right. Sometimes life gives us moments where silence reveals the truth. I was just there to see it. He reached for her hand. You are the reason I keep my feet on the ground, no matter how high I fly. She squeezed his hand softly. Their bond grew even stronger that night, not because of wealth or power, but because they both valued truth, dignity, and respect above all. In the weeks that followed, passengers began to notice changes in the airline's service. Attendants smiled more genuinely, listened more patiently, and treated every traveler with equal importance. Clara's quiet journey had sparked a wave of change that touched thousands of lives. The attendants who had mistreated her carried the memory heavily. Some left the company, unable to face their shame. Others stayed, determined to change, grateful for a second chance. For them, Clara's calm but firm words became a guiding light. Whenever they felt tired or tempted to judge a passenger, they remembered the simple woman who had taught them the greatest lesson of all. Months later, Daniel hosted an event celebrating the airline's anniversary. Standing before employees and guests, he shared the story publicly for the first time. My wife, he said proudly, taught us all something valuable. She reminded us that respect is not optional, it is the heart of service. This company will always stand for that. The audience applauded, many moved to tears. Clara sat quietly in the front row, her modest dress as simple as ever, her presence glowing not because of wealth, but because of her character. From that day on, her story became a legend within the airline. New employees were told about the time the owner's wife flew undercover, and how her experience reshaped the company. It became a reminder to every worker: you never know who is sitting in front of you. And even if they are not the owner's wife, they are still worthy of kindness and respect. For Clara, life returned to its quiet rhythm. She continued to live simply, never changing her ways, never seeking attention. But she knew that her journey had left a lasting mark. She had shown the world that even in silence, even in simplicity, one person's dignity could inspire change. And that, to her, was more valuable than all the diamonds in the world.